First, you got to be able to tell the difference between a human and an agent. Second is you got to intercept that traffic and speak the language, right? MCP, HTTP, whatever it is. And then the third is apply the reasoning for the policy.
Hey, don't forget, there's an AI networking summit coming up, and you're invited. So go to the onug, ONUG.net website to get your tickets now. So, and also if you're on YouTube or Spotify or any of the places where this podcast is being broadcast or streamed, make sure that you hit like or subscribe to it. Thanks.
Tom Gillis, Matt Caulfield, welcome to the Bill for Trust podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Always great to be here.
So great to have you both here. And I am really jazzed about the topic that we're about to have. I think before we start, I just want to make sure everybody knows everybody. Tom, everybody knows you, but we might as well just say a quick hi, what you do over at Cisco, but start with you.
My wife knows me. I didn't realize everyone knows me. That's cool. Tom Gillis, I'm responsible for infrastructure and security at Cisco. So think all data center stuff plus all of our network security stuff fusing together.
Awesome. Great. Matt, I'm not sure if you've been on the podcast before, so be good to introduce yourself.
Sure thing. I work for Tom, but other than that, I'm responsible for everything identity related at Cisco. So I'm probably a new face to the networking lights.
Okay.
It's awesome. Useful, Matt, to tell the audience, how'd you get to Cisco?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Right now I lead the whole identity portfolio, but I came in through acquisition, which Cisco tends to do. So I was the founder and CEO of ORT, which was an early leader in the identity security space. We helped create a category called identity threat detection and response, along with a bunch of other companies. Maybe 4 years ago, we got acquired by Cisco in 2023. That capability is now the basis of what we call identity intelligence, and it underlies a lot of other Cisco products. So yeah, really proud of that, and proud of the kind of the bigger role around identity that I'm now responsible for.
Yeah. So for any startup founders that are out there that are maybe talking to Cisco, Matt is now responsible for $1 billion portfolio. So not many startups get to go to that scale, but Matt is our thought leader in identity. And I think as we're going to talk about in the podcast, identity is literally at the foundation of networking, right? And all that we do. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening.
Yeah, that's great. And also, I think just on a quick note too, you hear that story so many times with Cisco, it's like the acquisitions, that you make, and the people just don't scatter, like you have in other acquisitions, they stay and they really contribute, and they grow, because I think, it's that now they get to see what they were doing and how that can really be applied to, many, many, many organizations and companies. So Matt, I don't speak for Cisco, but welcome aboard. I'm glad you're there.
And we're glad we have the talent is awesome to see. Just we get to work with startups, we get to acquire startups, we get to invest in startups. It's almost like the best of both worlds because we get to build our own kind of big company stuff, but also live vicariously through the startup community.
Yeah, and you had a liquidity event. It's life is good. Awesome. Okay. All right, great. Let's start. I wanted to kind of give a little bit of a context, to our discussion before we start. And we've been spending a lot of time within the ONU around Agentic and around what we're calling the Agentic AI overlay. And so what we've really discovered is that, agents, we all know that agents are proliferating. They're proliferating, much faster than probably any other technology that we've seen before, which always happens with something really hot. So I think during our prep call, I forget who it was, it might've been you, Tom, that mentioned agents and sandboxes are kind of growing almost like Novell networks were back in the 1990s. You have people, all over the organization just putting in these sandboxes, and IT has no idea, where they are, how they got there, but at some point in time, you need to manage them. And at some point in time is really right now. So we have that really growing. The other key thing that we also understand is that the buy versus build curve for software, enterprise software, has now shifted to actually build. I'm sorry, build, not buy. And so we've just kind of did a quick survey across the community. So many, especially in the large financials, are actually pausing enterprise software purchases. And they're basically, they have large dev teams, 1,000, 10,000 people in dev teams. Those are the folks who are now writing software with all the AI tools, utilizing both LLMs as well as agents. So another major driver around proliferations. The issue I think that we have is that a lot of CISOs are scared. A lot of folks in security that know about agents are really scared, but they are getting edicts from their board that they've got to like be on the AI bandwagon. You've got to understand how we do transformation and how do we utilize this technology. And so they feel a little bit lost if they don't. Actually, I heard this from like two CISOs like in the last couple of days. If they don't, actually show that they're on board with that, they're worried about they're going to get fired. So there's James Beeson, who's a CISO over at Pfizer. He said at the last Dallas event, like the edict at Pfizer was either change the people or change the people, meaning skill up. Or you won't be around very long. Yeah. All right. So going back to AI agents. So agents, they don't have passwords. They don't have MFA tokens. They don't have biometrics. Service accounts for a lot of the tools that we all utilize have no MFA, no personal identity, just static credentials and maybe some shared secrets. If you don't believe that the agents and handboxes are growing unprecedented, try to order a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio. There's probably a 4 to 6 month wait because that's the preferred mechanism for running agents. So we need a framework. And also we as kind of networking and infrastructure community, this is a unique networking problem. So Tom, I want to see if you can start diving in maybe on that topic, so it's okay.
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that there's a reason why these agents are proliferating, because they're useful, right? They solve meaningful business problems and all kinds of business problems. So software development is the most obvious place, right? Where we're seeing 10x and 20x increases in productivity, like staggering increases. But even the most mundane, sort of procedural business task. In fact, that's where the agents shine. If it's just like something you could write down in an instruction manual, these agents can do really, really well, and agents don't need a break. Yeah. So we are seeing agents proliferate everywhere. And like the example I use all the time is every company in the world has to process expense reports. Nobody likes doing it. I personally am wildly incompetent at it. Like you can't believe how incompetent to the point of like negligence. Like it was like once a year, I like pull out the receipts, like, oh my God, where the hell was I? And then it's some sort of, trip through memory lane. With an agent, you could write an agent that will say, look, I'm going to access our travel system, which is Concur. I'm going to give it access to my iCloud photo reel so it can pull the receipts. I'm going to give it access to my calendar so we can look at where it is. And these agents will spit out the report, like, as I'm traveling. And then I want that agent to reconcile the expense report and process the credit card. I do not want that agent to buy a Porsche, right? I mean, if it's my credit card, it's a used Porsche. I don't want that to happen. And so this is, I think, indicative of the problem. And these agents oftentimes have a human credential, so they do have authorization, and they have, humans generally have very long-lasting and very broad access, and yet the agent has the access of a human, but the common sense of a printer. And so we need an access control policy that is kind of somewhere between what we provide for printers and what we provide for humans.
Yeah.
Networking, access control is what we do in networking, right? This is a network function.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a network problem to solve for sure.
Yeah.
So Matt, you've been focusing on identity. So
Sure.
Even going back to what I was mentioning, earlier, is that one of the key requirements that we found is kind of agent authentication attestation bringing them in. How do we bring them in safely and keep them once they're in, keep them safely? So you want to kind of take the identity of agents, and tell us what you've been thinking?
Yeah, of course. So every agent, whether it's running on your laptop or running in the cloud or SaaS service, has an identity. And a lot of people think about authentication being a hard problem, especially for humans, because we got to deal with like squishy things like fingerprints and face scans and all those stuff. For agents, though, authentication is not the hard part, right? We can pretty easily assess that agent who is who we think it is. Certificates are really easy to manage. Like a lot of these kind of machine workload identity stuff is pretty cut and dry because we had cryptography and we got to worry about post-quantum encryption, but like that's to solve the problem. The authorization, though, it's really hard. We just issue service accounts to these things with permissions to go, make modifications and concur, look at all the photos in your photo album. Suddenly, agents are persistent. So like they're going to take full latitude on that and try to look at everything, try to access everything and work around problems and run into them. I try to give my personal agents access to my inbox. And like we get locked down in all kinds of ways at Cisco to prevent that. But it comes up with 3 different options to work around those controls. So they're so persistent that authorization, more so even than authentication, becomes a problem. Not who is the agent, but like what should that agent have access to and what should it be allowed to do with that access? And like that becomes the next battleground in identity that has remained unsolved for the past 30 plus years. Authorization is always, especially fine-grained authorization, we've gotten to a point where like what application should you access, but what can you do with that application? We've always kicked the can down the road because like Tom was saying, like humans generally, like they've got some judgment. Agents might have the judgment of a printer. And so we need to reinstill that somehow, like the morals, the ethics, the conscience, the kind of fine-grained authorization that we do intuitively. Agents don't have that. So we got to find a way to reinstill that when it comes to agents.
I think that's great. So let's go a little bit further. So we have agents. These agents, can communicate with clearly inference machines. They can also communicate clearly with MCP, services, gain access to various different data. And also it's like there are agents that are within a domain that you trust, your own environment. And there are also agents, or they might be communicating with agents in other domains, other cross domains that you don't trust, for example, like at OpenAI or an Anthropic or within Azure or within Gemini or what have you. So how do we basically look at that entire system, and provide both a kind of identity, control, make sure that there's a whole range of issues that people are concerned about. But I think, do we have a framework, that we can start thinking about that allows us to start building these systems and have guardrails and controls in place that we feel comfortable about? Or are we still in the early stages of the marketplace where we're still trying to understand, what we can do?
Yeah, so I'd say like the market's still very early on this, and like even meeting with the biggest, most sophisticated customers, just like earlier today, like they're still trying to get their head wrapped around the magnitude of this problem because you do have agents everywhere. No single control is a silver bullet. Like you say, oh, I solved it at the identity layer, like it's solved. No, same thing on the endpoint. Like it's no silver bullet. The one common feature here, I do think, and like I don't just say this kind of offhand because I'm at Cisco, because I'm the identity guy. I would love for it to be the identity. It's not. Like the network and it being in the network kind of between all the agents and all the things they're trying to access, whether that's an MCP server or like a REST API or like a website or even like the LLM API that the agent is trying to talk to. The only way to get in there and actually apply some of these fine-grained controls we're talking about is by being in the path.
Yeah.
When we say in the path, that usually means networking. In the path between the agents and the resources. So when we talk about a framework for agent security, of course, we got to think about the full life cycle of the agent. And there's some really cool stuff like Cisco's doing around like build time for agents. Like when we create these agents, when we run them through their evals, when we test their guardrails. That's really awesome. And then there's actually running them and then running them at scale. And that's where it gets really, really hard because now everybody in the company has these agents And you need to, at scale, give them access to all of these resources, not just Concur, but 1,000 other applications that people use every day to get their job done.
Yeah.
That's where it gets, pretty scary. And so having a framework that covers how do we discover agents, right? How do we see and get visibility into all of them?
Yeah.
And then how do we authorize every action based on an identity, strong kind of cryptographically assured identity? And then how do we provide continuous scrutiny, behavior monitoring, observability for those agents? It's kind of like, all right, discover them all, authorize every action, and then adapt to the risk in real time and provide continuous monitoring. Those three pieces become really critical to have a complete solution. And they span identity, networking, security, observability, infrastructure, all the things that we know we need to pull together.
Yeah.
I want to put an exclamation point on something Matt said, which is the endpoint is super important here, right? Having understanding what's happening in the endpoint, insight into what's going on in the endpoint, ensuring the integrity of the agents in the endpoint, that's all goodness. But a fundamental premise that I think this audience understands well is that we can't control what's on the endpoint. We can try, but like endpoints are popping up all over the place. The whole definition of the endpoint has changed. All of a sudden the printer could be running an agent and like that becomes an endpoint that we never thought of, right? So Raspberry Pis, can have the intelligence to do pretty amazing things. So the network becomes critical, and it's think about the problem in reverse, which is what are my assets that I need to protect? What are my sensitive applications? And then stick this little widget in front of those assets so that whoever is reaching out to these assets. And the other thing you mentioned, Nick, is protocol, right? MCP is amazing. MCP is like all the cool kids are doing it. It's new and it's hip. I think there's going to be a ton of agentic traffic using HTTPS, right? The good old fashioned, web,
Yeah.
And so you need to be protocol agnostic, right? You need to be able to speak whatever language the agents are speaking, figure out human versus agent. And then what Matt was saying is the really hard part here is that authorization. Like, what is the agent allowed to do? We're just going to get better and better and better and better over time because you can only solve that problem with reasoning.
Yeah.
You're not going to solve that problem with a static list of rules.
Yeah. It's, the more that you kind of dive into this, the more complicated it gets. And, especially on kind of like the higher level piece of that being kind of the governance and the policy. But we'll get to there in a second. I think one thing that I want to dive a little bit more into, and Matt, this is, I think, in your wheelhouse. And that is, there's been talk about maybe having proxies, within the network infrastructure where, right now, the way we've been thinking about kind of how agents communicate with all of the pieces that, that they're interacting with, is just kind of a best effort, a mesh, kind of like, kind of communications. But maybe that's not going to really allow for control, a really good control. So having maybe a proxy or a way to federate kind of a proxy where agents have always got to go up to this proxy first. And maybe that's where the MCP servers and other servers kind of plug in, data, access to various different data, access to other kinds of other zones that you don't trust and so forth. So have you thought about, an architecture kind of on that kind of structure?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd say like we need to get to a choke point of some kind. Like it's too important not to. Like, yes, we should let agents proliferate and figure out like what are all the great use cases that they can provide for our organizations. But at the end of the day, like the beautiful thing about the original firewall was like you put it between something inside and outside. Was a really nice and clean mental model for like how to secure agents. Like we kind of, I don't want to say recreate that, but like we do need to create some sort of funnel and choke point for those agents, because if we're going to look at every action they're taking and scrutinize every website they're going to and every MCP server tool that they're using and every single other API that they're touching, like we're going to have to send them through some kind of inspection point that's pretty smart and robust and like absolutely apply, network segmentation everywhere. But when it comes to like really deep L7 inspection, looking at every single MCP request and every single LLM request, we've got to go to more of a proxy architecture for that. Yeah. And those proxies can't just be in one place. They've got to be globally distributed, both in the cloud and on-prem, so that we can actually apply this as many places as possible, as close as possible to where the agents are.
Yeah. Hey, Matt. So when I'm talking to customers, obviously Matt and I tell the same story, right? We talk about this proxy, this gateway that protects your assets and from anything, God knows where the agent's coming from, et cetera. A question people ask me all the time is, well, how do you do that? What if my data is in Salesforce? What if my data is, sort of running out on Azure? What if my data is like, in a legacy system? And the answer is,
no, is that to me? No.
I was going to guess, but go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so I'd say like even in those legacy systems, we can absolutely get in front of them. A lot of the way that we do that is like we have to lock down the system, so there's no way around that proxy. And the way that we can funnel traffic to it, whether it's kind of a legacy system or not, is because of the network. Like we can connect to those endpoints and meet them where they are and make sure that traffic's going to the proxy. Tom, I don't know if that is the answer you're going for.
Yeah, well, and also we have when you think about this in abstract, it seems like a scary, hard problem. It's like, oh my God, everything's connecting to everything. What do I do? But there are very mature mechanisms for sticking gateways in front of the stuff you care about.
Yeah.
OAuth, right? So this exists. We just need to make sure that we apply these same mechanisms and techniques to all traffic, human and agents, HTTP, MCP, right? We don't care. It's all traffic is going to flow through this kind of unified gateway. And that's the choke point you were talking about. That's the control point where we get in. Now we can solve the hard problem of, is this transaction okay or not okay?
Yeah.
Right. And so I described the first part as plumbing, kind of a scaffolding that's necessary to be able to control these agents, which is first, you got to be able to tell the difference between a human and an agent. Second is you got to intercept that traffic and speak the language, right? MCP, HTTP, whatever it is. And then the third is apply the reasoning for the policy. So, and there's work to be done in each one of those three domains.
Yeah.
That policy one is really where the magic is. I feel like you're right, Tom. Like a lot of the first stuff, the things you mentioned, is like it's plumbing and then it's magic. Yeah. It's like you look at behavior and decide like appropriate or inappropriate to go over the push. Well, you need a lot of
networks with plumbing, dude, right? And so like our audience, we love plumbing. So let's talked about redirection and how you get to the gateway. How do you tell the difference between a human and an agent?
Can I do one thing before we do that?
Yeah, of course.
Matt mentioned something that I was like, okay, that's really interesting. And that is kind of quantum networking, and how that might play a role in here. Is that just like another kind of option that Cisco is looking at, or is that something that you're really just thinking it's time?
Tom, you want to take that one?
You mean quantum encryption?
Yeah.
Or
Okay, sorry. I thought you were saying quantum networking, which is like really you do networking using quantum entanglement, but like post quantum encryption,
I'm sorry. I'm thinking about quantum keys and distribution and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just as important, especially as identity becomes the front door and the lock on the door of how we get into these proxies and like identify things. Like you're going to need cryptographically assured identities, and it's going to do nobody any good if like you can crack them using post quantum capabilities. So it's really important that as we build out these systems and we think about how do we issue a certificate or a verifiable credential for every single agent, is going to do us no good if we're ignoring this kind of looming storm that's approaching, which is PQC. It absolutely should be designed from the beginning. It's 2026. So the algorithms are there, the standards are there. We might as well start there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. Sorry, Tom. So let's get back. So you were kind of drawing a line, around kind of plumbing and being able to kind of create these proxies, do all the stuff that we would normally do within networking. And I think you were kind of jump into like, policy, but.
Well, that'll be the third tier. This is the second tier, which I still think is pretty sticky, which is identity. So how do you tell the difference between Tom on a Cisco managed machine and an agent running on Tom's machine that has my credential and I want it to go do some business task, versus an agent in the wild? Like, Matt, how do we think about non-human identities?
Yeah, this is a super hard problem. Like, I would love to say, just don't run agents on your machine, run them somewhere else. And like, I feel like that's in the Mac machine. Definitely not happening. Yeah, SaaS.
Yeah, it was.
Well, yeah, that's a super expensive solution to the problem. some customers, by the way, they're going down that direction. It's like, no, you can't run anything there. You got to run in sandboxes. And like, that's how we're going to make sure that you're not sharing credentials, back and forth. Way more companies.
It was blocked, sort of Facebook when it first came out too, right?
Yeah, so, exactly. I think the more common scenario is like we do have Claude Code and Cursor running on our systems. People are, for better or worse, installing OpenClaw locally. And in that case, do I just share all my credentials with it? Well, for organizations that have gone to like phishing resistant authentication, the good news for the security team there is that you can't physically give your biometric, your Face ID, Touch ID to the agent running on your system. There's no way for you to transfer it to that. But then even then it's like, okay, great. So what do we do? Like, what kind of identity do you give to that agent? So there's this whole field of non-human identity, which uses a whole bunch of different techniques. Certificates are really, a big part of it. In order to give and issue every one of those agents a credential of some kind. But then where it gets really interesting is like, okay, that's great, but like, I'm not going to give the agent like its own email inbox. Nobody's going to talk to it, right? It's not that interesting. So like, we need to somehow delegate permissions to the agents on the systems. And that's where there are lots of interesting standards that make that possible for me to delegate a subset, not all, but a subset of my permissions to the agent, just so that it can go and, read my email inbox, but not, write to my email inbox or send emails. So it can move things between folders or categorize things. So that ability through standards like OAuth 2.1 to do on behalf of flows and delegated authorization become really important, so that I don't actually have to share my credentials, especially if I'm in an organization that's still using passwords, so that I don't have to share my password with that agent, but I can still share some of my permissions with that agent.
Yeah. Awesome.
And I think, as we get into a more sophisticated iterations of humans and agents working together, one thing that I've always believed, and I think, Matt, you share this, is understanding identity at the process level is going to be really, really important, right? The fact that it's Tom on a Cisco managed machine, it's kind of not that useful anymore from a security standpoint. I want to know what process on Tom's machine is initiating a connection. Yeah. And likewise on the server, what process is terminating that connection? And now you have a level of context that you otherwise wouldn't. And there's a lot of processes out there. So it seems like, whoa, how could you do that? In this kind of post-AI world, yeah, we can, right? Yeah. We can measure it. We can see it. We observe that already today. We've been doing that for more than a decade. Process level identity and correlating that to flows. It's just a ton of data. And now we have the ability to actually process all that data and make sense out of it.
Yeah, Tom, I feel like since you came back to Cisco like 3 years ago, you've been talking nonstop about like the importance of like looking at the processes on these individual systems. And like, I feel like all of that just been truly vindicated with the agent stuff. It's like suddenly.
Oh my God, that's for sure.
Everybody's joking about this. Like on the endpoint, it's like, okay, which process is a human? Which one's an agent? And like, how can I figure that out? And like, and then what do I do with it? Once I identify those flows, can I treat them differently? Like a lot of the controls we had in place in networks today are kind of at the per endpoint level, especially for network access control. But we need to get down to like per flow level. It's like, okay, this IP port number is from the agent. This IP port number is from the the human on the browser, and starting to provide a differentiated treatment depending on not which endpoint, but which process is actually sending.
Yeah. So there'll be a ton of development thinking on some of this plumbing issue, which we talked about, of just figuring out what is an identity, a human versus a machine, keeping track of that, and then passing that identity through the network so that that gateway can interpret that.
Yeah. So
which good. We all have jobs.
So the gateway functionality is going to really incorporate a lot of the plumbing features associated with how we're going to like secure and lock down agents and all the devices that they're interacting with. So, but one of the hard parts, and Tom, you mentioned this like during the prep, so I want to make sure we hit this, is around policy. Right. And so like, why don't we talk a little bit about policy, and not only just from a point of view how it gets implemented, but just how you start to create it. And then once you go down that rabbit hole, how deep the hole actually gets.
Yeah. So I think that's the hardest part. But what's cool about AI is that while AI creates these problems, it also presents the solution. And here's what I mean, is that I don't think it's practical to have some sort of static set of rules to say this is what an agent can't do. Right. Many customers are like, but I want guardrails. Okay, fine. You can put guardrails in, but let's pick that example of the expense report processing. That little agent, I want it to access my credit card to reconcile expense reports. I don't want it to buy a Porsche. And if I tell it, don't buy a Porsche, these agents are so clever, they'll be like, all right, I'll buy a McLaren. Yeah. And if I say, oh no, don't buy a McLaren either, it's like, okay, cool, I'll buy a Rolls Royce, right? And so it just keeps getting more expensive every single time I write a rule.
Yeah.
So the only way to solve this problem is reasoning. So yes, folks, the AI is going to be policing the AI. You have nothing to worry about.
It's going to be all okay.
But this is something we've been working on for a couple of years now, where we've realized from the chat era that like you just can't have kind of static, like the traditional security mindset of like, here's a list of things I block or here's a list of things I don't allow.
Yeah.
That's irrelevant now. And so you have to be able to understand context and look at what do we think is okay and what is outside of okay. And there are kind of small targeted security models, one of which Cisco has created and open sourced, that are tuned specifically for that type of analysis. It's really anomaly detection, right? I'm looking at an agent talking back and forth and behaving in a certain way. And then if I see a deviation outside of the norm, I'm going to flag that.
Yeah.
So while that's not a silver bullet, it has the advantage of it's going to get better and better and better over time. Like it's constantly refining that and making that, more and more effective.
Yeah, it's hard to predict.
Do you think that would be
exactly what tools an agent's going to use, unless it's like really rigidly defined? Like this help desk agent is just responsible for shipping people replacement laptops. Like, fine, you can probably write a rule around that. But for the most part, I want to walk up to my, Claude, ChatGPT, whatever, and ask it to do something different today than it did yesterday, and use all the creativity at its disposal to go figure that out. So it's really hard to write static policy rules. And if you could, you'd have to maintain so many of them for the number of different agents in the environment. It's just not incredible. It's like Tom said, like you kind of need to use AI to protect the guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. It's like so funny. It's like, we're so used to thinking about and especially in the networking, you do ACLs, so very detailed, it's like you shall do this, you shall not do this, and now we're kind of moving into something that's more cerebral and more reasoning based. That's going to take a little bit of time for people to kind of wrap their mind around and for them to get comfortable with. But I wonder, like, are you thinking about these kind of policies and this reasoning to be shared amongst, for example, like Cisco customers, so that they all can learn from each other, on what's working and maybe what's not working, or is that still going to be, and companies might have regulations that prevent them from doing that too, so I'm not sure if there's kind of an opportunity to kind of have kind of shared, best practices around policy.
Probably more a legal, like regulatory issue than it is a technical issue. I think we often give customers an opportunity to kind of opt in to using their data to train these models that might benefit other customers. And it really varies based on the organization.
Yeah, but assuming you get over those legal issues, I do think that, like it's just a little bit of common sense. Like the bigger your population, the more accurate your models become, right? So having customers sharing this and like, because a lot of these patterns are going to be the same. Like they're going to want my agent to access source code, but it's read only. Like okay, like that. These policies, there will be a lot of commonality. A lot.
Yeah. Okay. I want to dive into one topic before we adjourn, and that is how do we equip network engineers to talk with their security peers and their identity peers and kind of the CISOs that are running their organizations, that they own this. So how do we, kind of help them have that kind of conversation, so that they can be successful?
Yeah. I mean, it all starts with discovery. And Matt, I'll turn to you. You taught me this lesson, right? But like we have discovery tools for identity systems right now that uncover eye-popping things pretty consistently, right? Like, let's talk about discovery. How do we see what's out there?
Yeah, I think starting with discovery, and it's cross-disciplinary. Like nobody sees the whole elephant, right? So if you can get identity data out of the many systems that store it, along with network telemetry, along with all the logs you might be collecting in an environment, I'm not going to tell you get 100%, but probably like 95% of the visibility you need from those three sources to see all the agents in the customer's environment. And that, it's right. Like right now, discovery is sort of like that number one problem that everybody needs to come together to work on. So like network engineer has something around NetFlow data, DNS data, whether it's a Cisco tool or otherwise, like that is a really compelling data source that we combine with the identity pieces, logging pieces to get a more complete picture of what's going on.
Okay, so you're thinking that, the way that network engineers can actually start having this conversation is just one, hey, we've done a bunch of discovery. These are the agents that we have, and this is where they are, and these are the kinds of interactions that they're having. And we need to start thinking about how we're now gonna like manage this, control this, and govern this. Yeah, is that kind of like
network engineer talking to the identity leads and saying like, hey, how are you thinking about identity for agents? We're looking at, putting some kind of proxy or gateway in place that we can put in between all the agents and the assets in our environments. Like, let's work together on this one because that proxy is going to have to be identified.
Yeah. Here's a real life example. I was out, spent the day with the infrastructure network team for one of the largest healthcare organizations in the US. And we were talking exactly this topic. And one of the senior executives was like, yeah, I know agents are a problem. We're on board with Microsoft and we're using the Microsoft, agentic frameworks. I think like we're good.
Yeah.
And it took like a half an hour to convince this executive that like that's a useful, I'm not knocking on Microsoft. Yeah. But the thing about the Microsoft framework is it's amazingly good for Microsoft. Right? What else is out there? And just that, if you can produce a report and be like, yeah, there's, 20% of our agents are actually Microsoft agents. 80% of our agents are Workday, Salesforce, OpenCloud, blah, blah, blah. You just show who's talking to who. Yeah. And again, the network is the place to take that picture. I think that's a great starting point. Yeah. So it'll highlight the need for like, oh my God, like these, and I guarantee you'll find stuff you had no idea.
Yeah.
But this healthcare organization was funny. They were like, we see in the hospital, we see Xboxes because we've got children's wards. We see fish tanks, right? We see all kinds of crazy stuff on the network that like, I didn't think that was an endpoint, but yeah, a fish tank is an endpoint, right? Because
I wouldn't have thought that would not have come to top of mind. That's for sure. A fish tank. Yeah, well, I think that's like super, super helpful. It was interesting too, Tom. As soon as you basically said the whole Azure, thing, is that really, and I totally agree, not knocking anything that they have around their controls around agents, but it's almost like it made me think back to like 2014 or 2015 when everyone thought it was like a single cloud world. It's like this is a multi-cloud world and this is a multi-agent world and there's a multi-vendor world, and you really have to have controls that go across all of that. And I think that's fundamentally why this is a networking problem. It's not. I agree. It's not a single.
The identity guys will be like, yeah, we've got it. I don't think so, right? That's an important part of it, right? But your IDP, your identity store, that thing was built for humans.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go away. And now all the narrative we're talking about, like there's no scenario where like, retire your, Active Directory or your Entra. Like, nope, that's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is we're going to read that in, understand it, and then we're going to build non-human identities on top of that, of which there's, one or maybe two orders of magnitude more, maybe even 3 orders of magnitude more. There's a whole lot of non-human identities out there in your environment, dear customer. Yeah. And I think one of the cool things that Matt and team are doing is we link those two. Yeah. So when we see an agent that's running on Tom's machine, we know it's Tom and we know what Tom's entitlements are. So then we can cross-reference like, well, what is the agent trying to do? Does it match with Tom's privileges? That's like 1.0 policy making, right? Yeah. Like that's pretty basic, but important. So linking non-human and human identities into one comprehensive view is super.
Yeah, human accountability is really important. And a lot of organizations do have pretty robust systems for managing human identities. It's kind of like but just human scale. It's like, oh, we got a trigger to onboard a new person. That happens on the order of days. In the case of agents, it's like, yeah, 5 minutes ago, I spun up an agent and now I'm spinning up another agent. It's like, you don't really have a chance to send it through, onboarding training and ship it a laptop, right? And all these things. It's like a whole different order of magnitude.
Right.
Speed.
Right. Yeah. Let alone all the devices popping up in the environment, the fish tanks, like the right Raspberry Pis. So yes.
Well, I think this is like just really kind of tip of the iceberg, because I think what we're going to start to discover is that there are so many problems that get presented in an AI era that only networking can actually solve. So, and we're gonna really be talking about one of these in the next podcast around Glasswing, and that's using Claude Mythos, and how it's really super powerful technology. Obviously, the banking industry, where they basically pulled Anthropic pulled it because there was concern about it would create vulnerabilities within the financial services sector. But the most important thing about it is that it can really start to now look at software and understand vulnerabilities. So it's almost like we're going to start to see a whole replatforming occur within the industry, but also it's going to drive a massive, and Tom, you've been saying this, so I'm kind of like stealing your words here, but it's going to be, driving a major patching, environment all across infrastructure. So we're going to kind of tease that out, for our next time, but that's also a networking problem too.
Yeah. What's interesting is this AI revolution, the network is becoming increasingly important, more important than it was before. And I'm going to argue in the data center, like in the computers themselves, the network is the backplane for stitching together the AI supercomputers that are going to be running all these applications. Okay. And that has profound implications. In the north-south, access control world, like with agents springing up out of nowhere, as we talked about in this broadcast, the network is the only reliable place to put those controls. And then the issue you just referred to, sort of this new class of models is driving, kind of a hyper red team environment. A little teaser for our next broadcast, but our customers are looking at 100 log4j events in the same week. That's the magnitude of this tsunami. It's that bad, right? Yeah. Microsoft announced 125 vulnerabilities on SharePoint last week or yesterday.
Right.
Sorry, 25 vulnerabilities, right? And that's not a knock on Microsoft. Like, it's the tools that are finding these, vulnerabilities at a pace that humans have never been able to operate. So we, the industry, have to respond dramatically. It's not going to be like, please try harder to patch. That is not the answer. And fortunately at Cisco, we're on our toes, not our heels here, in that we've been thinking about a proactive approach to applying compensating controls to switches, routers, firewalls, infrastructure, but we can also apply compensating controls to your application software to your customer to shield those vulnerabilities while we can patch in an orderly fashion.
Awesome.
Times are changing.
Yeah. That's that good teaser, for the next podcast. But this was really great. Tom, thanks so much, for your insights. Matt, thanks so much for your core expertise, especially around identity, and thinking about how we're actually going to bring these agents, into the fold in a safe place. So, thank you both. Thank you everyone for watching as well. And we'll see you all at the AI Networking Summit. This gets published on May 7th, so in about a week or so.
Nice. Yep. Looking forward to it. I'll be there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.